Hello, it's Lord Slar here, come back in the video, and the topic of today's is what makes a good Dalek story. So this video is a little different from what I usually do, and that's because I feel like branching out from my usual best to worsts and top fives, just to see what works. Obviously, those videos won't be going anywhere, I'll still be doing them, but I want to try some new things, see what works, and if this works, I will certainly be doing more of it. But anyway, Dalek stories, there's something which could either be done really well, really badly, or just so mediocre it's it's almost perplexing. But yeah, New Who has a lot of bad Dalek stories. After series 1 they just don't seem to have got it right again for me, and there were a couple of bad ones in the classics as well, but I think considering the state that the Daleks are in right now, where pretty much 95% of fans are sick of them, we really need to look at what makes a good Dalek story, and how we can implement that back into the show, because this is the flagship villain. If the fans aren't interested in them anymore, you know there's a problem. And so I'm going to look at here ways that the Dalek stories are good, like things that they do that make the stories really good, so that we can see just where that could be implemented and how we can make the stories better. Positive outlook. So let's get into it. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is death. It's a pretty obvious one, because killing is what Davros designed the Daleks to do in the first place. It's what makes them scary, especially when it's not just death for the sake of death, and it's actually death of meaningful, built-up characters which you love or love to hate, etc. And you see them die just like that. That makes the Daleks seem very threatening and very imposing, and is what makes them effective as villains. And you see, when you don't have death, even not just death for the sake of death, what's the point in being scared of them? Like, there's nothing to make them effective, if you know what I mean. And how many people have the Daleks killed in the Moffat era? Very, very few. I mean, Victory of the Daleks, that didn't have any deaths other than Dalek deaths, did it? Asylum of the Daleks? Not really. There were off-screen ones where people turn into Dalek people, or whatever that was about. I honestly couldn't care. The Witch's Familiar, Magician's Apprentice, that didn't have much death. Into the Dalek had a tiny bit, but again, it wasn't very meaningful death. Not the kind of death you get in Power of the Daleks, for instance, where, in episode 6, you get all these characters just getting killed. That they're really well built up characters by the Daleks, which make them very effective, very threatening. Death is a very important part of Dalek stories, as obvious and simple as it might seem. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the psychology of the Daleks, because when used correctly, this can make them much more effective as villains, rather than just be, typical insert Doctor Who villain here. So yeah, there's a few examples I have of this, and one is Power of the Daleks. Yes, I know I'm mentioning it again, but it is that good of an episode and perfectly illustrates the points I'm trying to put forward, and, they manipulate the fuck out of the humans. Like, they're really cunning, they're really devious. There's quotes in it like, "We know the human mind. Daleks are Daleks are different than humans." That kind of thing, where they're trying so hard to like hide their hatred and contempt for the humans, but are just managing to stay undercover, be devious, and eventually kill everybody. Which, it's some fucking scary, tense stuff. The Daleks have done very well there. Another great example is in Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways, which is a brilliant story, even if the ending's a bit crap. But either way, the Daleks have done very good in it, because this really gets to the point of them hating humans across, because even though they've got their objective to stop the Doctor from, killing the Dalek fleet on floor 500, they go down to floor 0 just to kill those humans, and that is so dark. It punches me in the gut every time I watch it, and wow, that's a really good example of how you do Dalek psychology properly, because they hate us, they absolutely despise us, and they'll do anything to kill us. And when you get that point across as eloquently as Power of the Daleks and Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways does, you're on to a real winner in terms of a Dalek story. I think another thing which is pretty obvious, which most people will tell you about Dalek stories, is don't overuse the Daleks. I mean, some might say they were overused in the 60s, but personally, I don't think so, as they brought something new to the table every time they appeared. And then I think what worked really well about Dalek stories in the 70s and 80s, specifically the 80s, is they were nicely spaced out so that it was an event every time the Daleks appeared. It was like, wow, the Daleks are back. Whereas now we get them every year, and it's apparently this whole Terry Nation estate license bullshit. Yeah, I think that is true. I think the BBC do actually have that problem, but you could just throw them in the background of any one story each year. You don't need to have a story each year. You can, bend the rules like that. Well, I mean, I don't know. I need to actually see the rules, but it seems they manage well enough in Series 6, so why not do it, the rest of the time? Because we're all fucking sick of Daleks, and it's not just because the stories aren't very good and have no effort put into them. Stephen Moffat himself says he hates writing for them, yet he still does it every year. But just wow, I'm sick of them. We're all sick of them, and they need to go away for a bit and then come back bigger and better than ever with some of the things I'm suggesting. Another thing I've noticed is how grating it is in Dalek stories when there's inconsistencies. I mean, I just hate them. Asylum of the Daleks is so laden with inconsistencies, and it's one of the worst, if not the worst, Dalek story. I mean, people are probably going to pull up my top 5 worst Dalek stories, but I've changed my opinion quite a bit on that. While I still hate Destiny of the Daleks, it's not my worst anymore. But I really need to rethink that and put that out in, an update. To be honest, most of my old top 5s need to be updated, but whatever, let's forget about that for a moment. Inconsistencies. So we got Asylum of the Daleks just fucking laden with them, and it's annoying. It's really annoying to us as fans. And that's not the only story. You got Destiny of the Daleks, where the original writer of the Daleks, which made a point in the original story that they weren't robots, then says they are robots in Destiny of the Daleks, and it's just like, what? Ugh. And then, even though Davros has his eyes blown out when he, in his injury that, made him wheelchair bound, yet he opens his eyes in Witcher's Familiar. Just like, what the fuck? All you needed to do was look at the Davros TARDIS Wikia page, Muffa. I can accept some inconsistencies in the classic series because didn't usually have access to the older episodes, but you not only have access to the old episodes, you have access to all of the Doctor Who universe, and you can read it in a concise form on TARDIS Wikia. Yet you don't, and you make these glaring, stupid mistakes. And just before I end this section, uh, am I the only one who absolutely hates the thing where, when you're inside the Dalek thing, what the Daleks say, they're saying differently inside. Like when you say "I love you," it says "I hate you," etc. How many inconsistencies does that create with all of the other Dalek stories? I mean, I remember I was watching a Dalek story with a friend, and we were just enjoying pointing out like that. Oh, that Dalek's probably saying, "I love you" a bit, that kind of thing. It's just stupid. Don't come up with these stupid, inconsistent ideas which don't work at all because it really grates, and they tend to be in some of the worst Dalek stories. So, just don't do it. So, the last thing I'm going to talk about is how in a Dalek story you should try. You don't need to do this if it's, a really solid story written well that's good, but try and bring something new to the table. Try and make something different about the Daleks, different about the Daleks this time, because they are over 50 years old, and if you want to keep them fresh, you need to do something different occasionally. And in New Who's defense, it has at least tried to do something different with the Daleks. Most of the time, it's fallen flat on its face, and sometimes it's retreading the same steps with like Daleks and Manhattan Evolution of the Daleks, which just ew. No, that that looks disgusting. But you all know what I mean when I'm talking about that there. But the point is, doing something new with the Daleks is something which needs to be done these days. They could get away with it earlier on in the show, like 70s and 60s, because the Daleks were still relatively new at that time. Whereas now you really need to bring something new to make them interesting. And just look at Big Finish. Nearly every Dalek story they do, there's something new and interesting to the villains, and it really helps to make those stories stand out. Even though, yes, I do agree there is far too many Big Finish Dalek stories, but at least most of them, for the most part, bring something new and interesting to the table with the Daleks, and I like how that works. I think you who should look at it as an example. of what it can do to make their Dalek stories better, and indeed everything else I've said on this list. So that about wraps it up for my video on what I think makes a good Dalek story, and I hope if you didn't already make these observations, you'll take them on board, think about them, dismiss them if they're utter bullshit, or, think about it next time you're watching a Dalek story and be like, yeah, Dylan was generally right as he always is. So I'll see you back next time in another video.